Hello, this is a response to a video by the YouTuber Sargon of Akkad on the subject of statistics for sexual assault prevalence on university campuses. His video is about 2 studies, which I will be discussing in depth here. I'm going to be playing the entirety of his video within this one, and not skipping anything. I need to make it clear that his video is an excerpt from another one of his videos on the subject of Milo Yiannopoulos' recent talk at Rutgers University. I also need to make it clear that I haven't watched that video and don't feel it necessary to do so, since it is specifically things he says within this excerpt video that I wanted to respond to. And I have to assume that Sargon isn't misrepresenting his own views or arguments by excerpting this segment. In short, Sargon obviously felt this segment was good enough to stand on its own, and that it was appropriate for doing so, or he wouldn't have made it into a separate video. When I was doing the initial planning for this response, I had originally conceived it as a broad and lengthy look at campus sexual assault and began doing extensive research in accordance with that. However, as I was working out what that would entail, I realized that, based on the page-to-minute ratio of the previous scripts for videos on my channel, that would result in a video probably around 75 minutes long. And I decided that it would be quite unfair and ridiculous to make a response that long to a less than 3-minute long video. That just seemed way over the top. So I decided to drastically limit the scope of this video accordingly. However, I didn't stop doing the research I was conducting into campus sexual assault, and there was a lot of stuff from my originally planned video that I do want to still talk about, so I've decided to make a separate video about that a little bit down the line. Before getting started, I just want to address the fact that while this is the first proper video I've made about Sargon, I have talked about him before in a couple of hangouts on my channel, and I thought that maybe people might ask me why I bring him up so much, rather than talking about people like, say, Thunderfoot, for example. And the reason is, I generally don't feel the need to spend a lot of my time, and my videos, especially my response videos, take quite a long time to write, record, and edit. I don't want to be spending so much of my time addressing people who I feel have no redeeming qualities. Thunderfoot is, in my opinion, a fucking terrible human being who is not worth bothering with. If you watch my other response videos, they tend to be to people who I have at least some respect for on some level. Except for Tommy Sotomayor, who I don't know enough about to say for certain whether I have any respect for him, and nothing I have seen of his so far has generated any such respect. I chose to respond to him purely because he managed to cram in every fallacious anti-Black Lives Matter talking point into one video, so it was simply out of convenience that I responded to that as part of my ongoing series of videos on BLM. While I disagree with Sargon on the vast majority of his positions in terms of the things he tends to make videos about, I don't think of him as someone with no redeeming qualities. He is against doxing and flagging, which I respect, and he does have some amount of intellectual curiosity, even when it comes to feminism. So Sargon, if you're watching this, and I assume you will at some point, I'm not making this because I hate you. I don't hate you at all. I'm making this because I feel that talking about your content is worth my time. Oh, and lastly, I need to make it very clear that by responding to this video, I am not trying to claim that it is representative of Sargon's content as a whole. I'm not trying to make some kind of broad statement about him or his content beyond the confines of this specific video and only this specific video. Okay, well that said, let's get started with it.
There's contradictions within Milo's speech in and of itself. So, for example, when Milo is talking about how there's no rape epidemic on campus, that rape essentially doesn't exist on college campuses, and obviously he's using entirely false facts.
Well, obviously his facts are false and your facts are correct. But the thing is, I am such an asshole that I can't just take your word for it. I've got to go and check.
Well then, Sargon, I guess you'll be delighted with the contents of my video, because I too went and checked. And I feel like I was quite thorough, so if all you want is the facts, this video should please you very much.
I imagine that Milo was using this special report done by the US Department of Justice on rape and sexual assault victimization rates among college-age females between 1995 and 2013. This study found that young women between 18 and 24 who were students were safer than those who were not students. The rates of completed rape, attempted rape, sexual assault, or the threat of rape and sexual assault were 7.6 per 1,000 female students. And for young women enrolled in college, this went down to 6.1 per 1,000 students. This is less than 1%. These are facts we can be certain of. The only thing that is left out of these facts are the number of unreported sexual assaults and rapes, because obviously these are the reported ones.
Sargon has said that it doesn't account for unreported sexual assaults, but that's not true. To Sargon's credit, he did add a link to a video by one of his subscribers that pointed this out into the description box of his video. However, I find it rather astounding that he needed this pointed out in the first place, since it says on the first page of the study that it includes both reported and non-reported sexual assaults. And nowhere in the study does it say anything that might lead people to think it does not account for non-reported sexual assaults. There is this graph also on the first page that I guess might have somehow made Sargon think the study doesn't include non-reported rapes, but it never says that, nor anything even remotely close to that. And think about it, if they weren't using data that accounted for non-reported sexual assaults, how could they even present a graph like this? And it's not just the graph that indicates that the report accounts for non-reported sexual assault. The highlight box, also on the first page, includes these bullet points. Not that any of that is even really relevant, since as I showed, it is simply stated outright in very clear language that non-reported sexual assaults are included. There is one factor about this study that I do think will have affected its data in terms of the comparison between student and non-student rates of sexual assault, which is that it does not include incidents involving alcohol and drug-facilitated incapacitation, which I found strange considering that is certainly considered sexual assault as per the legal definition. And while there aren't, to my knowledge, any studies that make a comparison between students and non-students in terms of the rates of incapacitation-based sexual assault, based on reading the book Missoula by John Krakauer, which specifically deals with campus rape, and comparing that to the books Asking for It by Kate Harding and Rape is Rape by Jodi Raphael, which for the most part deal with rape in the general population, though they do at times cover more specific things like campus rape and military rape, it does seem clear to me that this method of sexual assault affects students at a higher rate than non-students. There is data suggesting that that form of sexual assault makes up for the majority of campus sexual assaults. And while we can compare such data to similar data for the general population, that general population data also includes students within it, so it's not a pure comparison between students and non-students. And as I pointed out above, I don't think such a comparison is possible based on the data that's currently available. The Campus Sexual Assault Study, commonly referred to as the CSA, which, like the study Sargon has brought up, was also conducted for the Department of Justice, and which I will be discussing again later, shows that 7.8% of women responding to the survey were sexually assaulted while incapacitated after voluntarily consuming drugs or alcohol, and 0.6% were sexually assaulted after involuntarily consuming a date rape drug of some kind. And both of those scenarios are included within the legal definition of sexual assault. Together, that is 61% of the 13.7% of women responding to the survey who had been sexually assaulted. Physically forced sexual assault only accounted for 34%. So you can see how leaving incapacitation-facilitated sexual assault out from this study has resulted in lower overall numbers than other campus sexual assault prevalence studies, the numbers for some of which I will discuss later. This study does itself point out that its findings in terms of overall pure numbers are anomalous when compared to similar studies, and it admits that its methodological strength is not, and was not supposed to be, getting as close to the correct pure numbers as possible. The point of the study being instead to create a comparison between students and non-students over a long period of time. That was always the point of the study, so its methodology is designed to fit that brief. Now, later on in this video, I will do a detailed comparison between the methodology of this study, the other study that Sargon's going to mention in a bit, and a couple other similar type of studies. The other thing I wanted to mention is that the reason Sargon brought up this study and its findings that sexual assault rates between students and non-students are roughly equivalent, as he said, less than 1% difference, the reason he has brought this up in the context of a video attempting to debunk the 1 in 5 stat is to say, look, there's obviously no epidemic of sexual assault. Well, even if the rates were exactly the same, that doesn't mean there's no epidemic of campus sexual assault, if there is an epidemic of sexual assault in general. The focus on campus sexual assault isn't necessarily because it is more common than general sexual assault, it is because it has specific factors that are unique to it, or unique in terms of the importance of those factors. The same is true for the focus on military rape, although in that case the data does show that male victimization is higher in the military than in general society. Okay, let's get back to Sargon's video.
And this is where hard data stops and social science begins.
And sorry, but I already got to stop it again. Hearing this sentence is what initially made me decide to make this video, because there are so many things wrong with that statement that when I was writing this, I wasn't sure where to start. There's a few clear implications built into what he just said that I need to address, so I'm going to break it down point by point. There's an implication that social science and data are mutually exclusive, or at least that social science tends not to be based on data. He's stated it in an entirely baseless way, and I suspect the reason he's done that is because it's not the case. It's the opposite of reality. It seems to me to be basically a smear tactic. The reality is, social scientists often come to conclusions about various issues that other people simply don't like. One of those categories of issues is related to feminism. And in the case of feminism, oftentimes the people that don't like those findings don't like them to such a degree that they feel the need to call the validity of social science in general into question. It's amusing to me because those same people won't hesitate to use social research when they feel it backs up their positions, which Sargon himself has just done. Which brings me to another implication in what Sargon just said is that the study he just discussed is not social science. The fact that Sargon would imply this is an indication of just how intellectually lazy his arguments in this video are. My guess is that he saw this and thought, statistician, that means this person was a mathematician, not a social scientist. But if he'd bothered to look her up, he'd have seen this: criminology, anthropology, and sociology. 3 different social science disciplines. Oops. Technically, criminology is an interdisciplinary field, and is 50-50 behavioral and social science. Doesn't mean criminologists aren't social scientists, though. They are. So you can see what I mean about people who call social science into question having no problem using the findings of social scientists when it suits them. Sargon may not have been aware that he was doing this when he made the video, but it has since been pointed out to him, and he hasn't added any annotations or taken the video down. So it does really seem like he wants the best of both worlds in terms of being happy to cast aspersions on the validity of social science, while simultaneously being happy to use data from social science. Because Sargon thought that the NCVS study didn't incorporate non-reported sexual assault, there's also an implication that incorporating non-reported sexual assault is somehow not a methodologically sound approach, or is a less methodologically sound approach, to conducting a sexual assault prevalence study, when actually the reverse is true. More on that later, but for now I will just point out that I'm not aware of any sexual assault or rape prevalence studies that don't include non-reported rape and sexual assault, including this one. And there is a very good reason for that.
Our feminist activist will be quoting from sources like this: a report on the Association of American Universities Campus Climate Survey on sexual assault and sexual misconduct.
I've got 2 issues with what he's just said. First, the way he puts this one study forward as a supposed example of the sort of thing that woman at the start of his video will be quoting from, according to him. He obviously put it that way because he either feels that this study is not methodologically sound, or he wants to present it that way by misrepresenting it. More on that shortly. Secondly, the way he says survey with a hint of disdain in his voice.
Campus Climate Survey.
It implies that this is a survey and therefore is less legitimate than the first thing he showed you. But the truth is, that was also a survey. That report is based entirely on the findings of the Bureau of Justice Statistics National Crime Victimization Survey. Oops. While I found that out by reading the report for myself, I could have seen it here on this image Sargon used in his video. Dude, if you're going to attempt to misrepresent studies, at least try to not be so sloppy about it. And if you think this was simply a mistake and Sargon didn't realize that it was also a survey, then that would indicate a rather extreme level of intellectual laziness. I personally think that Sargon wouldn't be lazy enough to not even read the first page of a study. But then again, there is of course a chance I'm wrong about that. So, either he is intentionally misrepresenting the information he's using in his video, or he is being mind-blowingly sloppy.
Respondents were asked whether one or more of these sexual contacts occurred as a result of 4 tactics. 1. Physical force or threat of physical force. 2. Being incapacitated because of drugs, alcohol, or being unconscious, asleep, or passed out. 3. Coercive threats of non-physical harm or promised rewards. And 4. Failure to obtain affirmative consent. The first 2 tactics generally meet legal definitions of rape and sexual battery. The other 2 tactics are violation of student codes of conduct. And it is unsurprisingly this massive inflation of what is and is not sexual assault that accounts for the 1 in 5 figure. Like they said, Half of their categories don't even fall under the legal definition of sexual assault or rape, and failure to obtain affirmative consent doesn't even mean the person wasn't consenting. Therefore, including that in any results is going to be inherently misleading.
The problem is, though, Sargon, they didn't include that in the numbers. See, what Sargon doesn't seem to realize is that the first two criteria he mentions are kept separate from the second two. The study divides its results up into different categories. Yet Sargon talks about this study as if all four of these, what they call tactics, are just lumped in together. This is a common thread running through much of the misrepresentation of rape and sexual assault prevalence studies. People claim that such studies are broadening the definition of rape or sexual assault when they actually aren't. Now, I'm not saying that never ever happens. I'm just saying that the vast majority of the time people level that accusation against a study, it's not valid. The idea that social researchers would make such an obvious mistake is a clear indication of disdain for them. These people aren't idiots, despite what some people would have you believe. They know what they're doing. If they include a definition of rape or sexual assault that is broader than the legal one, they keep that data separate from the data regarding the legal definition, in almost all cases. And this has been standard procedure since the late 80s. And it's the case with this study. They break it down by these tactics. Before proceeding, I need to talk for a bit about the definitions of the terms rape, sexual battery, and sexual assault, because people often get confused by what these terms really mean, and particularly the difference between them. As most people understand, rape in most jurisdictions means unwanted, non-consensual penetration of the vagina, anus, or mouth with any body part or foreign object. And for all the MRAs out there, I thought I'd state for the record that I support the addition of made to penetrate to the legal definition of rape. Sexual battery is a lesser charge involving unwanted, non-consensual sexual touching, also known as groping or fondling, unwanted non-consensual kissing, and forcing someone to touch your genitals or kiss you. Sexual assault is sometimes used interchangeably with rape or sexual battery, but in most jurisdictions, legally speaking, it is an umbrella term for sexual violence that can include a variety of crimes including rape, attempted rape, sexual battery, incest, sexual forms of intimate partner violence, child sexual abuse, and sexual harassment involving physical contact. But the term sexual assault is not always used in this umbrella way, so let's look specifically at the two studies Sargon uses in his video. In the case of the first study, it used the term sexual assault to refer to sexual battery, and not in the umbrella way, which is rather annoying since the study was conducted for the Department of Justice, and the Department of Justice's own definition of sexual assault is not interchangeable with sexual battery. It is the umbrella term I mentioned that includes both rape and sexual battery, as you can see here. Link in the description to that page on the Department of Justice website. In the case of the second study, the term sexual assault is used in the umbrella way. I apologize for the confusing nature of the varying definition of sexual assault. I've been studying this stuff fairly intensively for a while now, and this is something that has been annoying me a lot, so welcome to my world. There are many graphs and tables in this study. It's 228 pages long, but this table elucidates the main findings. This table is the most important in the whole study because it is related to seniors since entering college, which gives you a much better picture of campus sexual assault than, say, asking juniors or sophomores, and it gives a much better picture than simply asking about the last 12 months. This first set of rows uses only the first two tactics, i.e. the legal definitions of rape and sexual battery, which it labels as penetration and sexual touching, respectively. The second set of rows adds attempted rapes to the rape number, and the sexual battery number remains the same. I should just note that it specifies here that it is adding attempted rape involving physical force and not attempted rape involving incapacitation. This is because it is impossible for the victims themselves to be certain of attempted rape by incapacitation, as, well, they were unconscious, or had severely impaired sensory perception at the time. The only people who can confidently assert a claim of attempted rape by incapacitation are witnesses, and this is a table about victims, not witnesses. This study does actually have some interesting data related to people witnessing rape and sexual battery, but it's not relevant to the subject of this video, so I'll move on. The third set of rows adds the third tactic, coercion, resulting in a change to the numbers for both rape and sexual battery, And the fourth set of rows adds the fourth tactic, failure to obtain affirmative consent, which results in a further change to the numbers for both rape and sexual battery. So, as you can see, they have kept the numbers related to the two tactics that do not meet the legal definition of sexual assault separate from the two tactics that do. Since, as I showed before, the Department of Justice defines sexual assault to include rape, sexual battery, and attempted rape, we should be using this as our number for this study's findings on the prevalence of campus sexual assault. 27.2%, so above the 1 in 5 number referenced in the title of Sargon's video. And for those shouting, "What about the men?" at their screens, the 1 in 5 college sexual assault prevalence that Sargon's title refers to relates specifically to women, and the first study Sargon used in his video is primarily about women, though it does address men here. But Sargon didn't show this, and the graph he showed was specifically about women, so it seems clear to me that he's specifically talking about women. So by choosing this number, I'm merely comparing apples to apples and staying on the specific topic that Sargon's video is about. Now, you might be thinking, well, okay, Sargon's presentation of the study wasn't accurate, fine, but what if the study was flawed in another way? What if the methodology wasn't sound? So that's what I'm going to talk about now. In order to do so, I'll need to discuss some commonalities among rape and sexual assault prevalence studies and just this kind of social research in general. I'm going to talk about two main factors here. First, I'll revisit what I brought up earlier about including non-reported rapes. As Sargon's own preferred study states, the rate of students reporting rape and sexual battery is only 20%. It should go without saying that in order to get reliable stats, you shouldn't start by excluding 80% of the data. And actually, that 20% figure is on the very high end of the spectrum. There are a variety of reasons why the reporting rate for sexual assault is so low, some of which are relevant to both students and the general population, and others which are specific to students. I'll now read from a section of the Campus Sexual Assault Study, or CSA, that I mentioned earlier. Among the general population, approximately half of the rapes/sexual assaults reported in the 2002 NCVS were reported to the police. Because date and acquaintance rape are less likely to be reported than stranger rapes, the likelihood of reporting sexual assault is lower on college campuses. In the NCWSV study, completed and/or attempted rapes were reported to law enforcement officials in less than 5% of cases. Several barriers to reporting were identified by victims. 1. Not having proof that the incident occurred. 2. Fear of retaliation by the perpetrator. 3. Fear of hostile treatment by the authorities. 4. Uncertainty that the authorities would consider the incident serious enough. 5. Not knowing how to report the incident. And 6. Desire to prevent family and others from learning about it. There's one victim type that this particular reason for non-reporting is especially significant for: men. And while I'm talking about men, just a quick note for anyone who cares about the kind of men's issues that the men's rights movement tends to talk about a lot, the reporting rate for male rape victims is substantially lower than for female rape victims. So if you care about the stats for male rape victims being even remotely close to accurate, you should be a strong advocate for the inclusion of non-reported rapes in rape prevalence studies. Among victims included in the NCWSV, the most frequently cited reason for not reporting incidents to the police was because victims believed the event would not be considered serious enough by authorities. In 42.1% of the incidents, victims did not report the incident because they were not sure a crime or harm was attended, which, side note, I believe is another way of saying they're not sure if a crime was committed. And in 30% of the incidents, victims believed the police would not think the incident was serious enough. For rape victims in particular, a commonly cited reason for not reporting the incident to any police agencies is not wanting family members and others to know about the victimization. 38.9% of rape victims in the NCWSV cited this as a reason for failing to report the event. From the perspective of campus administrators, some policies may discourage victims from reporting, such as campus policies on drug and alcohol use. Victims who had been drinking may be concerned about reprisal for violating such policies, and policies requiring victims to participate in adjudication. And there's another whole side to this. Research shows that a very worryingly large amount of rape victims don't know what happened to them meets the legal definition of rape. That's why in rape prevalence studies, they don't ever simply ask, "Have you been raped?" They ask questions like, "Have you ever had sex when you didn't want to, due to the other person using physical force?" Studies have found that only approximately a quarter of those whose experiences met the legal definition of rape were aware that said experience is legally considered rape. So again, framing the questions as they do in rape prevalence studies is to not exclude 75% of the data. And I should just mention that the NCVS study also used those kinds of questions as well, although they decided on a rather unusual approach in which they first asked directly about, say, rape, and then asked follow-up questions typical of the approach taken by rape and sexual assault prevalence studies. Okay, now I will move on to the other methodological factor about this study that I wanted to mention. For those who aren't very familiar with rape prevalence studies, or social research in general, they might see the fact that this study involved an online survey as problematic. But there are two important reasons why many campus sexual assault prevalence studies are conducted in that way. For one, rape victims are much less willing to be completely open about their experience when talking to a survey conductor over the phone. They feel a lot more comfortable, safer, and more able to be forthcoming when they have the increased feeling of anonymity that the internet provides. Secondly, when focused on college-age people, web surveys simply give you access to the most people. Another very common survey methodology is random digit dialing. Many, but not all, examples of which apply solely to landline telephones, and most college-age people no longer have landlines. And even the ones that do call mobile phones are also problematic, since there are many people who will often refuse to answer calls from unknown or private numbers. While I'm talking about survey mode, I should just point out that the NCVS used an unusual system of in-person interviews and follow-up phone interviews. It never specifically explains how it selected the people to be interviewed, but I suspect, based on some of the wording they used in the report, that it involved census data in some way. I have to wonder, given the propensity for false negative responses in random digit dial surveys, how much of that there would be in an in-person interview. I mean, if I was a rape victim and some stranger came along asking me if I'd been raped, I'm not sure how able I would be to be open and forthcoming in that situation. Look, the reality is, no methodology is perfect. Every social research-based study is going to have some variable that some people will inevitably view as not ideal, for a reason with at least some amount of legitimacy. And these kinds of studies usually create their methodology to be ideal for one kind of thing and less ideal for others. And hence, different kinds of studies have different strengths and different weaknesses. Like what I was saying about that first study that Sargon used, about how its weakness was a solid look at the pure numbers, and its strength was a over-time comparison between students and non-students. According to the people who created the study, I mean. And that's the same with all these kinds of studies. They have strengths, they have weaknesses. So if you want to undertake a fair examination of such subjects, you need to look at studies with varying survey modes, with a variety of data selection and collection methodologies. And if you are trying to figure out if a particular study has valid findings, as we are currently doing with the AAU study, you should also look at other studies with similar survey mode methodology. So that is what we are going to do now. We'll look at several studies, one with very similar methodologies for survey mode, population selection, etc., and two with quite different such methodologies. The AAU study makes that very easy for us, as it includes some of the findings for several other student sexual assault studies. First up is the CSA. The CSA is a very respected and widely cited study with similar methodologies to the AAU study. It was web-based, and though it only asked students from 2 universities when the AAU study asked students from 27 universities, it had a considerably higher response rate. These comparisons are related to the table I showed earlier for seniors since entering college. The bars on the left are comparing rape and sexual battery by force or incapacitation, though excluding the numbers for attempted rape, so the number they are going with is 26.1, instead of the number I used earlier, 27.2. The number from the CSA relating to those same criteria is 19.8. And actually, it is my understanding that this is where the 1 in 5 thing comes from, as the CSA is the most widely known of any campus sexual assault prevalence study. As you can see here, the CSA's number relating just to rape is higher than those of the AAU study. The AAU study also features comparisons to 2 other campus sexual assault prevalence studies, though they are more different methodologically, so cannot be compared in exactly the same way. Though, as I pointed out before, comparing studies with different methodologies is important in terms of getting a good picture of the overall stats. I'm going to read directly from the AAU study now, page 27. The National College Women's Sexual Violence Survey was a national telephone survey of college students ages 18 to 24 years old, conducted in 1996. The behaviors included attempted acts as well as completed acts and did not screen for acts involving incapacitation. The most comparable estimate to the AAU survey is completed and attempted forced penetration for the current school year. The NCWSV estimate was 2.8%. The rate for the AAU survey, once excluding instances of penetration involving incapacitation, is 2.9%. The Massachusetts Institute of Technology, MIT, conducted the Community Attitudes on Sexual Assault. This is a web survey with a 35% response rate which asks students to report about their experiences since entering the university. So just a quick note about this study, they didn't divide the results up by year. So all the results are for all undergraduates. There's no specific number for seniors since entering college. The estimate from the CASA study for the prevalence of sexual contact by force and incapacitation for undergraduate females was 17%. The comparable estimate from AAU is 23.1%, which is significantly higher. So, as you can see, when compared to other campus sexual assault prevalence studies, both those with very similar methodologies and those with somewhat different methodologies, the numbers are fairly similar. And before moving on, I just want to show you this paragraph from the next page, page 28, because I find it relates quite interestingly to the description that Sargon gave of his video as seen here, explaining where the claim that 1 in 5 young women in college will be sexually assaulted originates and why it is false. To do this, he's presented one study, the AAU study, and since he misrepresented its methodology to such a degree, I think we can safely say he didn't show why it's false. But more importantly, the word I want to focus on here is originates. So he puts forth the AAU as like an example of a study that shows the 1 in 5 sexual assault so-called myth. But let's have a look at what the study itself has to say about the 1 in 5 thing. Overall, these comparisons illustrate that estimates such as 1 in 5 or 1 in 4 as a global rate across all IHEs, and for those that don't know, that's an acronym for Institute of Higher Education, is at least oversimplistic, if not misleading. None of the studies which generate estimates for specific IHEs are nationally representative. The above results show that rates vary greatly across campuses, and as seen from the discussion above, they vary by IHE characteristics. The two surveys with the most comparable definitions and questionnaire wording to the AAU are the CSA and NCWSV. The CSA estimate for both sexual touching and penetration involving force or incapacitation was lower than the AAU estimate, 19.8% versus 26.1%, but was within the range of estimates across the 27 campuses included in the survey. The NCWSV estimates, a nationally representative sample of forced penetration, were almost identical to the AAU estimate. The AAU estimate was consistently lower than the MIT survey by 1 to 5 percentage points depending on the gender and enrollment status of the student. But again, it was within the range across the 27 IHEs. I just find it funny that Sargon puts this one study forward as a supposed example of a study that has a 1 in 5 result, when not only does it not have a 1 in 5 result, it says that 1 in 5 as a global rate is at least oversimplistic, if not misleading. Okay, finally we get back to Sargon's video.
And finally, these surveys are not facts. We do not know whether the answers given on them are true or false. They are, as they say they are, estimates.
Yes, just as the first survey data you showed also used estimates. But you don't mention that. And not only did you not mention that, you stated repeatedly that the NCVS survey results were facts.
These are facts we can be certain of.
Nope, they're estimates. Maybe you didn't realize that, but again, it is mentioned in the very image you used in your video. Oops. Okay, well that is the end of Sargon's video. As I mentioned at the start, I was originally going to make this video much broader in scope, and was going to now begin discussing a variety of factors related to campus sexual assault that veered away from the specific things Sargon discussed in his video. But I decided not to do that, and will instead make a second separate video about campus rape, because most of the available data is specifically focused on rape and not things like sexual battery. If you disagree with anything I've said, or if you have any questions or something to add to any of the points I've made, feel free to leave a comment, though I implore you to be civil, and I will endeavour to do the same. Thank you.